very warm welcome to the Public on Policy series at the Center of Policy Research and Governance, CPRG. We are a Delhi-based independent think tank promoting responsive and participatory policymaking through cutting-edge research and analysis across policy domains. The Public on Policy series is an online monthly series to demystify current policy issues for the general public, most important stakeholder in public policy. Each month, we are privileged to host experts for a freewheeling and candid conversation, delving into the intricacies of complex policy issues and presenting them in an easily digestible manner. This month, as the world marks the World Water Day, we'll try to understand an issue much closer to home. The connection between groundwater and irrigation is significant in India, with the groundwater levels falling drastically. Interestingly, in 2020, the Central Groundwater Authority discovered that Punjab is currently the highest extractor of groundwater in the country, and 97% of it is being used in irrigation. To understand this issue better, we have with us today Dr. Disha Gupta. Ma'am is an assistant professor of economics at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai. Her research interests lie in agricultural economics and resource and environmental economics. Her research uses modern applied econometric methods and micro-level data to address questions relating to the linkages between farm power pricing policies and groundwater irrigation, water energy food nexus, and agriculture productivity in India. She completed her Ph.D. in economics from the Delhi School of Economics. As our host, we have with us today Mr. Vipul Dixit, a visiting fellow at CPRG. I am Arjun, serving as a research assistant at CPRG as your co-host. So, Vipul sir, let's start.
Okay, thank you so much, Arjun, for this warm welcome and a nice introduction. I hope we are going to have a very fruitful discussion with Dr. Disha. So, as the water day is approaching and we are focusing to understand a little better about the situation that that we are in right now. So, as Arjun rightly mentioned and introduced you as somebody who has worked in this area and who has an expertise in untangling the issue of groundwater crisis for India. So, I would like you to please. I mean, we'll go to the larger question afterwards, but at the beginning, very briefly, can you please tell us about your study and the methodology you followed, so that in general for audience we understand what the work has largely been and what has it been its finding. So yeah, in very briefly, not I don't want you to put so much time to just explain about your work. We will get to that, of course. So yeah, over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Arjun, for a wonderful introduction for both of us. And thanks, Vishal, for being here for, interrogating me today on this very important issue of groundwater irrigation. So, as part of my research, also as part of my PhD thesis and what I'm working on now, I have been looking at groundwater issues in the northwestern part of India and mainly to do with Punjab. And as Arjun has already told us that the groundwater situation in Punjab is worse if you compare it to any other region in the country, because 80% of its blocks are overexploited and critical. So my study looks at the impact of this policy, which was introduced in 1997, wherein the government made the agricultural electricity free. So prior to 1997, farmers were charged a flat rate fee, which was based on the horsepower rating of the pump that they were using. But in February 1997, the electricity was made free. Although, there was a reversion of this policy from 2002 to 2005, but later again, it was made free. So, I look at the impact of this policy change on the number and the type of tube wells that are installed in the state. And I also look at its impact on a very important outcome variable, which is the groundwater depth itself. And I used the difference in differences methodology, since this is a natural experiment. And I compare the changes in outcomes in Punjab to an agriculturally similar and neighboring state, Haryana, where farmers continued to pay a flat rate fee as opposed to farmers in Punjab. And what I find is that there has been an increase in the number of electric pumps that are installed, and also, the pumps that are installed are of higher horsepower if you compare it to its neighboring state. And there's also a differential increase in the groundwater depth in Punjab if you compare it to Haryana. So, that's the short-term impact of the policy change that I looked at as part of my study. Although I also look at some of the heterogeneous impacts on groundwater depth due to, the technological differences between the different kinds of pumps. But, maybe I can elaborate on that later as we proceed.
Okay. So yeah, so we as we understand that you have done it in with respect to Punjab specifically, and also have compared it somehow with the issues with the condition of Haryana's groundwater level. So can you please, for a very generic introduction, I would like you to just let us know what exactly is the magnitude of this problem that we are facing. I mean, in general, of course, in Punjab, you have mentioned, we know that Punjab is the most drastically affected right now. But in general, how would you tell us about the magnitude of this problem for the country and agriculture society that we are? What are their basically the challenges or the variations across the country? If you can, in general, you can put it down.
Right. So, if we look at India as a whole, it is, the world's largest user of groundwater for irrigation. And as you see that there has been an increasing reliance on electric operated tube wells all throughout. So, the problem in general started off in the 1970s when there was an expansion of grid electricity. And it was felt that, if you install meters on each and every tube well, it would involve huge transaction costs. So it was felt that, it's better that we implement a flat rate pricing of electricity. But the intention was that these flat rates would be revised upwards, depending upon, the later on nature of the pumps, etc. But, that sort of revision never happened. And there was flat rate, which was implemented in most of the states. So if you look at most of the states in India, the charge that's there for electric power in agriculture, it's only on the basis of the horsepower rating and not really on the actual consumption of electricity. So in that sense, farmers do not have an incentive to use these resources efficiently. And there's over exploitation of these resources, right? So I'm not paying for each unit of the electricity that I consume. So I end up over consuming it. And the situation in some of these states, such as Punjab, and also, Telangana or Tamil Nadu, where electricity is free, is even more worse. Because, I'm not paying anything. So I could be, instead of one electric pump, probably I would be installing two, or, I could be using a horsepower rating, a higher horsepower rating, a more powerful pump to extract much more water. And what this is leading to is that, the kind of cropping patterns that you see in Punjab and in Haryana too, mostly farmers are cultivating paddy. So, these are extremely water intensive crops. So, one of the issues that's there in these states is the kind of cropping pattern that we have. Since, the electricity is highly subsidized, farmers are overusing water and they are cultivating these water intensive crops, which is contributing to depletion of groundwater. And if I specifically talk about Punjab, so at this moment, the stage of groundwater development, according to the most recent report of the Central Groundwater Board, is at 166%. Which means that the ratio of the groundwater extraction, the annual groundwater extraction to its availability, is at 166% already, and that's the highest. So, that's sort of, that is the situation that we are in right now. And, something needs to be done. So my study particularly brings out, quantitatively what is the impact of this policy change. And some measures definitely need to be taken in order to, improve the situation from here.
So we will come to the to that solution part later. I just wanted to ask you about, in general, if we can. We identified Punjab and Haryana as the agriculturally most advanced state as well. But in general, for a layman audience that we expect to deliver this session too. Can you little bit throw some light on the crisis that the agriculture sector as such is facing with respect to groundwater extraction in India? So that was the, I mean, if you can, I mean, we can definitely.
Of course. So, historically, there was much more use of canal irrigation, right?
Okay.
But, as there was green revolution, there was introduction of high yielding varieties, etc. And, there was expansion of groundwater irrigation because grid electricity was coming in.
Okay.
So now if you see that there is much more use of electric operated tube wells as compared to also diesel operated tube wells. And one thing is the technology itself. So, diesel pumps cannot be used, beyond a certain depth. So in that sense, also, the use of electric pumps has been going up. And that's somewhat all across the country that we see these trends rising. But in the northwestern part in particular, also because of the cropping patterns and the intensity of the usage, I would say that the situation is worse if you compare it to the others. Like if you do a blockwise comparison on the percentage that are, overexploited in terms of groundwater extraction, the northwestern part does the worst.
Okay. So how much do you think there is dependence on of agriculture on groundwater, in particularly in these places, northwestern part? How much are the agriculture dependent upon the groundwater extraction for agriculture?
So, majority is actually groundwater irrigation.
Okay.
And very, very less is being done by canal irrigation. Of course, there's conjunctive use of canal and groundwater at several locations. But because the depth is so deep, one needs to really use these electric operated tube wells to fetch the groundwater irrigation, which is mostly used in order to irrigate the fields.
Okay. So, I mean, these states that like particularly Punjab that you have worked in, they have been like doing so well in agriculture for so long. So it's very, I mean, it's counterintuitive to think that they have not really thought of alternative to the groundwater extraction for the purpose of agriculture. So do you can you please tell us something about the alternative of groundwater that is available in the agriculture sector in northwestern India? I mean, it could be I mean, in general, I'm talking about the alternative, not in terms of what they are actually doing. What are the potential alternative available to the farmers, which can be used? They might not be using it right now, but like a potential alternative, I'm asking.
Well, instead of asking me what the alternative to groundwater irrigation should be, I think it's the cropping patterns that are playing a huge role.
Okay.
Even if I reduce some amount of groundwater irrigation, but I continue to grow crops that are water intensive, I'm not really solving the problem.
Okay.
There are various ways. I could talk about the interventions that are in place. But the major issue that this region is facing is about the cropping pattern that they've been following related to the water intensive paddy per se.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I understand. So this is basically there is I mean the crop as you say cropping pattern in the state of Punjab and Haryana in particularly is the main reason which is driving the loss of so much of groundwater. So can you please tell us more about the problem, the challenges that are there in actually as you know, the solution you are yourself saying that the crop diversification is the solution, but what are the challenges or the structural implications or the impediments that are actually stopping from actually reducing our burden over the groundwater for our agriculture?
Right. So, crop diversification is one of the things that's required. But in order to implement it, there are, several other packaging is required. So, for instance, one needs to have procurement of the lesser water intensive crops. So at this moment, there's MSP for paddy, for wheat. But for the other crops, there's no marketing infrastructure per se. So that's one thing that's extremely important. If you would know that there are some instruments that are also used apart from crop diversification. Of course, crop diversification is one thing that's been brought at the forefront, wherein a government also introduced several instruments in the sense that they introduced cash incentives if you cultivate less water intensive crops. And also they promised that these less water intensive crops would be procured at MSP. Apart from that, if you would recall, for groundwater management, there was also a Subsoil Water Act, which was introduced in 2009, wherein, the sowing was delayed to a certain date. And the reason was that, most of the irrigation would be rain-fed if it's delayed, and groundwater irrigation will not be used. And, there would be lesser evaporation if you don't start earlier. So in that sense, some bit of water would be saved. If you talk about very recent intervention, which was discussed by the Parliamentary Standing Committee, was about the prepaid cards on electricity. So now what they're also suggesting is that there should be prepaid cards for power in agriculture, and also power supply should be limited to fewer number of hours. So in some sense, the policymakers, the government, they also understand that the problem is there. But there has to be a packaging around, several things. So for instance, we can't continue with, let's say, a flat rate or a free electricity sort of a regime. There has to be volumetric pricing in some sense, which is reflected by, their idea of introducing prepaid cards. So, these are several mechanisms that need to be in place together so as to, promote crop diversification so that, less water intensive crops are cultivated. And there is some amount of groundwater management in the state.
So in your, I think from your answer, I can pick two things which are very touchy right now about the electricity pricing for farming, as well as the crop diversification and MSP that you mentioned. So I just want to want you to tell us a little more about these two thorny issues that are there in addressing the main issue of water crisis in Punjab and as well as the in general northwest of India.
So yeah, in some sense, if you just talk about volumetric pricing independent of everything, you must have seen that people say that it's politically infeasible because in some sense, the way free electricity was introduced is that there was a newly formed government that introduced this policy change. And, they've been getting, for more than 20 years, farmers have been using electricity free of charge. So it is anticipated that there would be some sort of inconvenience if, or some sort of protest from the farmer. And also if, volumetric pricing is just made independent of the other changes that are required. So I would say none of the tools that I pointed out can be used independent of each other. In some sense, if you want to bring in crop diversification and if you want to promote crops like, maize, etc., which are less water intensive, you also need to have, procurement for these crops, or there has to be marketing infrastructure, or, these crops have to be made profitable for farmers to cultivate. So right now, if I, as a farmer, I feel that, paddy is more profitable for me, it'd be difficult for me to shift to other crops unless, these are also made profitable in some sense. So in that manner, MSP comes into place, right? If there is a procurement of the output that now I'm cultivating, and if I shift away from paddy, I have to make it profitable for farmers for them to cultivate these crops. So, there are several challenges. I would not suggest one single policy change that can magically bring about, solve this problem of groundwater crisis that the state is looking at. But there have to be several instruments that have to be put in place in order to, getting into the solution, as you call it, for the issues of groundwater management that we face in the northwestern part of the East.
Okay, sounds good. But let us know a little bit about the solution that, as you mentioned, what exactly do you have in your mind when you say solution or a packaging of solutions that can help in this kind of situation?
So, well, as I already mentioned, one needs to move away from paddy and cultivate less water intensive crops. And in order to promote cultivation of less water intensive crops, there has to be procurement of these crops. There has to be demand for these crops. All right. And in some sense, they have to be made profitable. So, when you look at yields of these crops, how do they compare to, paddy? Whether, it is profitable for me as a farmer to cultivate these crops or not, right? So I think all these things, and not just the pricing of electricity, wherein, you're paying for each unit of electricity, or rather restricting the electricity supply, which is one part of the story, which is an important part. I think it's important to, do something in order to shift to lesser water intensive crops per se, in order to save water. This also reminds me, now that you're asking me about this issue repeatedly, if you would see, recently there was an intervention that was done in Punjab, wherein, farmers were given some pre-specified daytime uninterrupted electricity supply. And they were said that, if you, for each unit of the electricity that you save beneath this threshold, you would be given cash compensation. And what the authors of this paper, which was published in IGIDR very recently, found out is that, there was a reduction in irrigation hours by these farmers without having an impact on the crop yields. But in some sense, although the crop was saved for, these cash compensations which were given to them, what is the proportion that we are looking for? I think, one needs to couple in the crop diversification scheme as well, wherein, promotion of cultivation of crops such as maize, etc., should be talked about. And I think it's already there in place, right? We already have the crop diversification scheme. It's just that how you package all these around so as to incentivize farmers to implement it properly.
Why this crop diversification is not really functioning that well in Punjab and Haryana?
Well, the reason being that probably this is not still profitable for the way it is implemented. Of course, in Haryana, if you see, I mean, I haven't seen any quantitative study till now, but of whatever we've heard so far, for different kinds of crops, there are different, cash payments that are given per unit of area in order to cultivate lesser water intensive crops. And we are slowly and steadily moving there. So in some sense, the way you think about these policies have to be put up in a manner so that, it's profitable for the farmer to make a shift. Of course, the policy is there, right? But one needs to make it profitable for the farmer so that they really go out and shift some of their area under paddy to these lesser water intensive crops. And we are yet to see, some of these things are very, very recent. We are yet to see what kind of an impact these schemes would have on the acreage of these different crops.
Okay. So I think we are definitely running out of time now. So I would just ask to Arjun to if he has anything to add to whatever we have been discussing. Arjun, please, if you have anything, please ask.
No, I think we are at the end of our session today. So
Okay.
Thank you so much for this conversation, ma'am and sir. The conversation has definitely helped us in simplifying this policy issue, and it is one step forward in the direction of making policy accessible to the public.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Arjun. Thank you so much, Vipul. Thanks for joining in this session.